the silver lining was that we became very united as a people. We only had one cause and one cause only, and we all worked towards it, and everyone did their part. We're really proud of these young men and women, but now the women who have seen that there are avenues for them to pursue justice for their country. We have given them agency, and that is one of the most poignant and most important parts, I think, of CFTJ. We have given hope to a nation who didn't know that there are tools on international forums in the international judicial system for them to find some sort of respite and justice.
Welcome to the St. Martin's Cloak podcast, where we go behind the headlines to focus on humans, not statistics. On today's episode, we're delighted to talk to Gevorg Vardanyan and Maggie Arutyunyan, two members of the Centre for Truth and Justice, or CFTJ. Their mission? To document and collect evidence of war crimes and ethnic cleansing committed by Azerbaijan in the enclave of Artsakh, more commonly referred to as Nagorno-Karabakh. Set up in 2020 in response to the start of the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan over control of the enclave, the team at CFTJ have made it their goal to hold the perpetrators of these atrocities to account. We hear from Maggie and Gevorg some very powerful and impactful accounts about their personal experiences from the war, their motivations on working with CFTJ, the atrocities they've witnessed as part of their work, as well as the process itself of documenting war crimes and presenting them to international tribunals and governments in order to ensure that the world does not forget what has happened to their country and to its people. But first, a quick introduction.
Good morning, everyone. This is Andrew Loftusness recording from Istanbul.
Hello, everyone. This is Milos Majore recording from London. So, Andrew, we've got a new region of the world that we're covering today, specifically the dynamics in the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh, also known as Artsakh, and this is something that we're going to explore a lot in this episode. How are your thoughts on the interview that we just had?
I mean, I've been thinking about this one since we wrapped it up. It was very impactful, and personally, I learned a lot. So I'm certain that our listeners will learn a lot too. First off, I just want to say thank you again to Gevorg and to Maggie. You guys were awesome. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work you are doing. And we know that we asked you to come on and talk about very difficult subjects that are very personal, that are very close to home. But I think it's extremely important for people with no personal connection to Armenia whatsoever to hear these stories and to hear the truth about what happened there. So thank you guys again.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you guys both for coming on. We say this a lot on the topics that we cover, but it holds true here as well that this is a subject that doesn't get covered that much in the media, or when it does, it's little bits here and there. But at the end of the day, there's so much going on in the world at the moment. All the conflicts that we've covered, all the humanitarian situations, it's really hard to keep track of each one of them. And the work that Maggie and Gevorg do at CFTJ is really impactful. It's really trying to change that, and is really trying to make a lasting impact, throughout history in a sense. I mean, what they're doing is documenting war crimes, is documenting atrocities, bringing that evidence to the courts of law, whether it's the ICC, whether it's, governments, the United States, the United Kingdom, the EU. And other than building a case against the perpetrators, it's also so important to have a historical record of these things. Because as we know, this is the kind of stuff that as time goes by, people like to reinvent or rewrite how things occurred, how history happened. There's always some kind of bias there. But these guys, really cold, hard facts on the ground, unfiltered, raw facts from the ground. I mean, it gets pretty explicit at times, and it's obviously due to the nature of the stuff, it's really visceral, hard work that they're doing. And really important. So thank you guys for your work.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for people to hear those difficult, harsh truths, right? I mean, when during the interview, when we were talking about like the actual work of war crimes documentation, I was thinking of the Genocide Museum in Sarajevo. Uh, And I think there's a lot of crossover between the work that has been done and is being done there, and that the Center for Truth and Justice is doing in Armenia. And then just to go back to something you said a minute ago, where this is underreported in mainstream and international media, that's definitely the case. When we were doing our research for this episode, it was very interesting to pick up on trends on how the 44-day war has been discussed in the media, especially when it was ongoing, watching like old news clips and stuff. And we see versions of this in other parts of the world, but there's always this framing of uh, former Soviet republic of such and such is fighting. And I think that that does a couple of things. One, it removes in the mind of listeners like agency from the people who are actually making these decisions to go to war and to commit these crimes against humanity. And it also, I think, diminishes, it's important to recognize like the history, right?
Yeah.
But if you're going to do that, I think you need to take the time to do that and not just set up the framing for an international audience that creates this image in the mind of this unresolvable ancient conflict, so to speak, when in fact, these are living, breathing people with agency making decisions
Yeah.
to do the things that they're doing, right?
Yeah, they're not just two former Soviet republics that are kind of intrinsically always at war. I mean, this should be avoidable. And what you mentioned about the history is important, and it does factor to some extent in their work. I thought it was just very cool to see how focused their work really is, in a sense. The CFTJ was set up in 2020, right after the atrocities committed by the Azeri side in September of 2020. And this is something Maggie said, that, every American remembers where they were on 9/11. Every Armenian remembers where they were on the 27th of September, 2020. And really that has, really focused their work, their scope in terms of the evidence collection part of things. But obviously there is that whole history that you mentioned that is lurking there in the background. The 2020 war was actually the second war of in Nagorno-Karabakh. And prior to that, you had all sorts of instances going back to the Ottoman Empire of repression, of violence, of genocide. Absolutely, it's just something that you cannot shake off, of the feelings that obviously Armenians do have with regards to the whole conflict, and it's important to tell that story clearly and well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also important to find the right people to tell that story, right? And that's really what we were trying to do here. I think when the 44-day war did start, I remember, if again, just from not from the perspective of people living it, but from the perspective of someone in the international community watching coverage, it's one of these places where there's a breaking headline and then everyone is an expert, right?
Yeah.
When there's such a complex history and complex identity in this part of the world, and I'm very grateful that we were able to find not only two experts but two people who are like proactively involved in
Hmm.
justice issues on the ground.
Yeah. And it was great because we had this, obviously, this interview remotely. You joining from Istanbul, myself here in London. And then Gevorg was in Armenia on the ground, and Maggie was in California, where she's based full time. So it was this interesting, like, international dynamic.
Yeah. In the intro, I said we were joining in from 3 countries when in fact it was 4. So
Yeah. Really, it's a miracle that the connection held, but
it's a miracle
here
that
we
we
are.
figured out the time zones to
Yes. Oh. Um, but what we like to explore on this show, we've done this before, is always trying to understand the kind of people who are willing to drop everything and help out. We've talked about this in Sudan and Ukraine, in Lebanon, but here as well, they are both Gev and Maggie were in the States, if I'm not mistaken, and they're both civil litigation lawyers. So not really trained, they're not, it's not like they had a vocation for humanitarian law that they really pursued at all costs. They had a good career, good life in a sense, and obviously still do. But when the war started, they they didn't hesitate and basically put this thing together out of nothing because they saw it as their mission, as their driving purpose to do this. And they both mentioned that a lot of the people that work with them do it pro bono. Like, this is really less of a career and more that just inherent need to want to help out, and really inspiring to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Most people in the world, they see some sort of catastrophe unfolding, and the reaction from most people is, "Oh my god, that's so terrible. I hope someone does something about that," right?
Hmm.
One of my favorite things about this podcast is that we're talking to people who actually are practicing some agency and saying, "I will be the one to do something about that." Right.
Yeah.
Because you hear about things like, war crimes documentation and preserving the stories of survivors of genocide and that sort of thing. And unless you're involved with it, it's like, oh, this is something that there's communities that address these issues, but it's not something that just happens. So someone needs to decide, no, I'm going to be the one that actually does something about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's time to cede the floor to the experts in question. Ladies and gentlemen, we give you Maggie and Gevorg.
So, good morning and good evening, everyone. We're calling in from 3 different countries right now. Before we get things started, I was wondering if both of you could just introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your background, your personal relation to Armenia, and then how you became involved with CFTJ.
You'd like me to go first, Kev?
Please.
My name is Maggie Arutyunyan. I am an Armenian American. I was born in Armenia, and we migrated to the United States when I was 6 years old. The maternal side of my family are from Artsakh, and the paternal side of my family are from the Ottoman Empire. So my dad's grandma and dad were part of the Armenian genocide. And so this type of strife is not new to me or my family. I feel like it's in our DNA. And so I think for up until 2020, the work for me, I thought as an Armenian, was to get genocide recognition. Clearly, that's pivoted greatly after 2020, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But I'm an attorney, and as an attorney, I feel like we use the pen as our sword. And that's exactly what we did with CFTJ, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on.
So, my name is Gevorg Vardanyan. I was born and raised in Armenia. I actually was born in former Soviet Union, which became Independent Republic of Armenia. And just like Maggie's family, mine immigrated to Los Angeles in late 90s. And just uh, somehow life led me to the legal world. I became an attorney, have been practicing for the last 16 years in California in civil litigation. And my roots are deeply rooted in modern day Armenia. On my father's side, We're from a village called Garni, just outside of the capital. It's known for the first century AD temple, pre-Christian era. It's like one of the first destinations that tourists see after landing. uh, Mom's side, pretty much, yeah, they're from the same area, although her one uh, branch is coming actually from a region called Igdir, just on the other side of Araks River, which is basically on the foot of Mount Ararat. And yeah, before the war, just wanted to make sure that raise a proper Armenian family outside of Armenia, and then somehow, some way, life took its course, unfortunately, and 2020 war basically sort of put fire on everyone's feet who feels Armenian, and I was one of those. I was looking for a cause to join, and I joined a little later than Maggie, about 2 years afterwards, and here we are.
Thank you both. Before we have a number of things that we want to talk to you guys about, but before we get into all of that, do you mind just explaining for our audience what the mission for the Center for Truth and Justice is?
Um, when the war started on September 27th of 2020, um, we knew that we couldn't stay in the Armenia sphere echo chamber. We also knew that we needed to gather evidence as much as possible, whether it was deeds, whether it was testimonies. So a group of attorneys, mostly from Los Angeles, some from New York, Canada, we decided that we would train law students in Armenia from 4 different universities on how to take testimonial evidence. And so we began, it was very elementary. We bought some cameras, sent it over there. We had them sign non-disclosure agreements, and then we started capacity building with these law students in Armenia, teaching them how to take evidence based on international evidentiary standards. And so I'm happy to report that we now have over 600 pieces of audiovisual evidence from those whose human rights had been violated, from repatriated POWs who were in the dungeons in Azerbaijan, and somehow, by luck, or thank goodness that that happened, they came back to Armenia, and those whose siblings, children, spouses had passed, those who were displaced. And now we have 600 pieces of evidentiary evidence. That was the initial mission. The initial mission was just to not stay in the echo chamber and to gather this evidence in real time. We had seen what happened during the genocide when my great grandmother, who was a survivor in the 1990s, I remember every year in April, they would, whether it was the LA Times or USC or UCLA, they would come and take her story down. But it was decades too late, where um, we didn't really have an avenue or a way in which we could get justice for her. So we knew that we had to do this in real time. And after that, the mission changed kind of, and I feel like this is, it's ever changing for us. We started with just collecting the evidence, and then we were like, what do we do with this evidence? We had it translated, and if you know anything about dialect, the Artsakhi dialect is very rich and thick. So we needed to have it translated in English, in Spanish, in French, because we didn't only want to be the ones to listen to this. We had to have it translated and transcribed in all these other languages so that we're able to present it to international governing bodies. And so we started writing white papers and reports, which we submitted to the UN, to US Congress. And then we were like, you know what? Maybe these reports are too long. They're on our website. Yes, we're submitting them. People are probably not reading them. So then we started to bring in victims to these forums, whether it was to the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission hearings, whether it was to taking them to the UN, whether it was when we first filed our communication to the ICC, whether it was taking victims to The Hague with us. So um, the mission is ever changing because our need is, we're understanding, is also pivots. Whether if something's happening in Armenia, like for instance, the 2020 blockade, we knew that we needed to get to work and with countermeasures. When the war was happening, the need was different. So, because our need is ever changing, our mission is also ever changing. But one thing remains the same, and that is to be a neutral third party and to collect the evidence and to make sure that we're safeguarding the truth.
So you touched on a lot of different aspects there, and we'd love to get into more detail into all of them. And I liked the quote that you said with lawyers using the pen as the sword. But if I understand correctly, and you both mentioned this, both of you don't have a background necessarily on documenting war crimes and on humanitarian aid and conflict resolution and the like. It's more in the civil litigation side of things, and that some might argue is a more comfortable life sticking to that than the process of documenting war crimes. So can you unpack that a little more, the motivation that you had personally for that transition, going from that, civil litigation, legal side of things into the world of this mission of documenting these war crimes?
I mean, evidence collection is evidence collection. So, whether you're a civil litigator or contract attorney, as long as you have the evidence, you have the tools for the next step or the next phase of your legal work. And you're right, none of us are humanitarian attorneys or international lawyers. But what we did was every step of the way, we deferred to those who know this better than us. We have worked with law firms, we have worked with ICC prosecutors, and we have worked with academicians to ensure that every step that we take, we are not tainting the evidence. We are ensuring that we're safeguarding the evidence. And you're right, it is easier to, you know, work for yourself and, be your own boss and not really get into this. But would we really be doing a service to the disenfranchised had we done that? And when I sometimes think about if we didn't have CFTJ, so many things would not have happened. And that's the driving force, I think, for me. Would we have had these the repatriated POWs going into the halls of Congress and speaking to congressmen about their strife? Would we have had the first ICC communication? Would we have this documented evidence that no one can ever change, um, of this history that we have basically now set in stone? So that's the motivating factor, and that's what that's what leads us to continue the work that we're doing, regardless of the fact of whether we're humanitarian attorneys or international lawyers. The fact that we're not any of those things.
Hmm. Was it the same for you, Gevorg? How was that transition for you?
So, as Maggie said, evidence is evidence. And as an attorney, especially when you practice civil litigation, the alphabet, so to say, is the same. You just modify it to whatever legal field you're going to apply it to, as long as you're able to make sure that it's not tainted and can be used in its pristine form. So, in that sense, I guess it helped a lot for us being attorneys, and thankfully we were able to use various networks to establish these connections with various legal scholars in humanitarian rights and international law, including scholars, to basically introduce our work to that so that it can be used wherever it's appropriate. And in terms of the reason why is because we are survivors of a nation that experienced genocide, and it's very personal to us. There is always that fear. And you lose sleep, actually. During the 44-day war, I think I slept on average probably 2-3 hours a day. And it's tough. when you see that's happening. I had family members, extended family members, 18, 20-year-old kids whose bodies were not discovered during that war. So that's the driving force.
Yeah, very powerful. We want to talk about the war itself and your work doing it. Obviously, very impactful, very powerful work that you're doing. Before we delve into that, we wanted to help ourselves and our listeners understand some of the terminological difference because, as you know, names carry a lot of power and a lot of meaning, right? And I've already heard, as you guys speak, the term Artsakh, and I hope my pronunciation is not failing me here.
Not at all.
And thank you. And then on the other side, that region is also called Nagorno-Karabakh. So can you explain for our listeners the different origins of the names and perhaps the connotations that they carry with them?
Sure. So I'll take that if you don't mind, Maggie. So basically, Artsakh is the ancient original name of the region. It used to be one of the, I think, 13 uh, states of ancient Armenian kingdoms at various stages of history. And as you may know, Armenians have lost and regained their statehood in various stages. So Armenia proper, as we know it, lost its statehood in 1045, basically over 1,000 years ago. And we didn't have statehood until 1918 when it became a republic briefly for about 2-3 years. But sometime around, if I'm not mistaken, 17th century, when these various local um, tribes who eventually were converted to Islam, and I guess there is a lot of intermixing with Turkic, Arabic, and various other Islamic nations. Sort of took over the region. They changed the name. Nagorno-Karabakh, it's sort of distorted. It should be Nagorno-Karabakh. Nagorno means mountainous in Russian. Karabakh is a Turkish word which means black forest, essentially, or black garden, because the region had very dense forest, and that's where that name originates from, and it's been used down the years in the last 2-3 centuries. And the Nagorno, because it was mountainous, there was also the Artsakh Plains. So there is another region uh, adjacent to Nagorno-Karabakh as well, which is in present-day Azerbaijan. So that's the brief history of the origins of those two names.
We appreciate that historical perspective. So on September 27th, 2020, of course, Azerbaijan launched an attack against the Artsakh region. And as we begin to talk about that, I wanted to ask if both of you would be okay sharing your memories from that day, because I think it's very important for people to hear uh, what kind of impact receiving that news has on real people, and not just from the perspective of political punditry.
The everybody remembers where they were with like September 11th. And I think every Armenian remembers where they were on September 27th of 2020. Mind you, we were in the thick of COVID. And my husband and I were at a friend's house, and we were having a great time, opened up social media, and we saw that Azerbaijan had attacked Artsakh. This attack felt different in scope and scale to the clashes that we had had before. There was the 4-day war. There were other minor ones in 2016, I believe. This one felt different, and we knew that it was a serious one. Um, as I said, I have family in Artsakh. I tried them all. I couldn't reach them, so I tried my family in Armenia, and they were visibly shaken up. And I was like, this is happening. This is what's going on. I think this is it. And we immediately came home. Obviously, we didn't sleep all night, and that for another 44 days until the ceasefire. And you feel paralyzed. You feel paralyzed in place. The fact that we didn't know what to do. Do we fly out there? I mean, do we we were doing, protests in front of, LA Times to talk about us, in front of we were closing down freeways, we were shopping from Costco from diapers to oil so that we can send it back home. We were reaching out to everyone we knew who had access to PR or, any sort of news station to put this on the map, to talk about it, and it was just mostly local. We were like chicken with our head cut off. We didn't know what to do to get this war to stop. And I think it was one of the most traumatizing 44 days of our lives. And the silver lining was that we became very united as a people. We only had one cause and one cause only, and we all worked towards it. And everyone did their part, from my children dumping out their piggy banks and donating the money to I know men who flew out there who were trying to get in on the front lines. I know Armenia won't allow it, but it went from something that small to something that huge because we knew we couldn't lose this land. We knew it meant so much to us. I mean, the monastery where Mesrop Mashtots, who is the creator of the Armenian alphabet, is in Artsakh. Um, that and so many other amazing, beautiful Armenian churches and landmarks. So we knew we couldn't lose that. We couldn't lose the land, we couldn't lose the people, we couldn't lose the sovereignty. Artsakh was a democratic state with elections and governing bodies, and somehow this autocratic nation was trying to wipe it off the map and take over. So we all sprung into action, and until CFTJ came, I think is when I found some solace in now knowing that I had a mandate and I had to take action and I had to help in this one way that I knew how, which was the law.
As just like Maggie, I remember the day very vividly. I was on the phone actually with my cousin who lives here in Armenia. And as we were speaking, he said, "Oh, it seems like a war has started." I guess he was watching TV simultaneously. And it all started from there. And all I was hoping that it's going to last a week or so because previously some similar incidents happened, particularly in 2016, the 4-day war, as we call it. But yeah, unfortunately, this one had disastrous outcome, and yeah, those are the first memories of that day and the following days. Oh, one other thing I remember, I frantically started searching the internet for news, and every single Armenian media source was hacked by uh, Azeri hackers. Everything you clicked on, it was in Azeri flag with military figures on display. So, I'd caused the panic, obviously. And then it just settled in, and we were living it from distance on a daily basis in a state of despair, anger. It was just a cocktail of emotions when, especially you're so far away, you don't know what to do, how you can contribute to uh, your nation.
And I'd like to add that it didn't help that social media, Telegram especially, was riddled with Azeris torturing and tormenting Armenians, whether it was wrapping them in the Azeri flag and shooting them in the head, or kidnapping them, or desecrating their grave sites, or just traumatizing Armenians all around the world. That didn't help at all.
On that note, a question for both of you. What does the international community need to understand about the impact of the war on the Armenian people, both at the time as it was occurring and, of course, now uh, that they are almost certainly not getting from, again, the mainstream media coverage during the war and just the way that Armenia in the war is discussed in the present day?
Um, I think the international media needs to understand that the war was not just a territorial dispute. It was experienced national trauma and another threat to our survival, to a country that's already dwindling in size. I mean, we come from uh, in 1988, we had a huge earthquake that took between 25,000 to 50,000 people and left 500,000 people displaced. After that, in the early 90s, came the collapse of the Soviet Union. After that came the first Artsakh war. And then we had an infant country trying to find its footing. And we were finally starting to see some peace when the war happened. So the mainstream media can focus on maps and geopolitics and ceasefires, but what you have is displacement, national trauma, the erasure of a national identity, and a nation that is already an insecure nation. The fear of another such war. And it doesn't help that Azerbaijan has the type of rhetoric that they do about Western Azerbaijan project, which literally takes over the entire map of Armenia. It doesn't help that we have continued to have videos of mass desecration of our grave sites. So I don't know whether the gravesite of my family, my great grandparents, is there or not. We have the mass desecration of our churches and just our national identity. And so, not only do you have the statistic, yes, 5,000 young men killed, and if you compare that to a nation with 2 million people, that's 0.25% of the population that was killed in 2020, not to mention the thousands of young men that are disabled, not to mention the over 100,000 Artsakh that Armenia had to absorb after the 2023 blockade. So you have about 30 to 40 years of Armenia constantly just taking it from earthquake to ethnic cleansing. And I mean, we are resilient people, but I think that's what the world needs to understand. One more thing.
Mhm.
I think when when the perpetrators get away with this level of atrocity with impunity, it emboldens other perpetrators. And we've had cluster munitions on Stepanakert. We've had white phosphorus used during this war, all banned by international bodies. And nothing happened to Azerbaijan or its leaders. And then what did we see since 2020? We saw that happening in other parts of the world. So it's a message that we're sending that the perpetrator can get away with impunity as long as they're strong enough, as long as they have better PR, as long as they use caviar diplomacy. Yeah.
In terms of media coverage, again, it's unfortunately it's one of many conflicts that constantly are simmering around the world. And yes, in 2020 there was coverage, but it was sparse. It was very brief, and of course, this may sound biased. It was very distorted. I remember a few interviews by renowned journalists. One of them was Christian Amanpour, who was interviewing, I think, at the time, the Armenian prime minister. And I was just, the entire time, I was wondering, where is this hostility coming from? Because Armenians, unfortunately, were not able in the last 25, 30 years to convey the message about what Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh is. So in the international community, it was not a recognized territory. It was, well, quite the contrary, it was as recognized territory of Azerbaijan, according to former Soviet Union maps. and no one paid attention that these people actually used the letter of the law of the Soviet constitution to secede and declare independence. And so whenever there were these interviews with Armenian government officials or whoever, there was this outright aggressiveness that Armenians are being the aggressors here. They have actually taken territory of another sovereign state. And I felt like the takeaway during that war from what world media was spreading was very tainted and incomplete. And moving forward in the following hostilities in 2022, and in the basically expelling of the Armenians in 2023 from Nagorno-Karabakh, I don't think even got any kind of news coverage, with the exception of few independent news media sources. So um, it's unfortunately it's just a drop in the ocean, and it never really deserved the true attention that it should have gotten at the time.
And on those two last points that you made there, obviously 2020 was this, well, it wasn't the start, but it was certainly the start of your work with CFTJ. But since then, we've seen a continuation and spikes in the conflict, in the hostilities, in the atrocities that happened. Could you just provide can you go a bit more in detail on what you just mentioned, Gevorg, on the events that have happened since 2020?
So basically, um, about a third, if I'm not mistaken, of the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh was lost to Azerbaijan at the end of the 44-day war. And then after that, the Russian peacekeepers moved in, and they were supposedly going to guarantee the safety of the population there. However, in the following 3-year period, there were constant aggressions, where there were constant provocations, pushing the front line, killing people who are working on the fields or working on, I don't know, water pipelines. And then I believe it was 2021 or 22, there were incidents in the border of Armenia proper, where the Azerbaijanis advanced, took some military points, uh, and then there was another incident in September of the same year. And then the most atrocious event happened in 2022, when they actually, again, advanced into Armenia proper. And there were executions of Armenian soldiers that were actually documented by Azeri soldiers, after basically these soldiers put their arms down. There were tortures and mutilations of female Armenian soldiers, and actually we have documented that evidence as well, CFTJ, that is. So, and as a result, today I think about 144 square kilometers of Armenia proper are occupied by Azeri forces. And it seems like they have no intentions to leave, because they've fortified their positions, and they're all in strategic areas overlooking villages and water reservoirs and so on. And this is what didn't get coverage actually in the world media.
And including the 2023 blockade, where under the guise
Right.
of, you know, environmental protectionists, they put a chokehold on the one region where Artsakh is attached to Armenia, and it was basically an open prison for Armenians. We had documented people dying from starvation. Um, and so after, I believe it was 9 months, Kev, correct me if I'm wrong, they finally opened that. They actually attacked. They first attacked Artsakh, and they opened that blockade,
Corridor.
that corridor, and it was only egress. And so we had between 100 to 120,000 Armenians um, fleeing into Armenia from Artsakh. Um, it got so bad that roads were collapsing because of the sheer amount of people trying to leave at the same time. Um, that was just another trauma that the people of Artsakh had to relive after the war.
I want to revisit something you mentioned, Maggie, specifically a number, and you said earlier on that at least initially the death toll was at more than 5,000 people. Add to that 100,000 people who've been displaced, and you just sort of alluded to that as well now. What we really try and do here with this podcast is, our motto is humans, not statistics, right? Because at the end of the day, it's easy to talk about the statistics, 100,000 people, 7,000, whatever. But at the end of the day, with 100,000 people come 100,000 stories, right? In working with some of the victims through your line of work, or perhaps through people you know, if you're comfortable sharing, are there any stories that come to mind from the wars that you'd be willing to share?
Gev alluded to her. Her name was Gayane Abgaryan. She was a female soldier who had 4 children. She was mutilated by Azeri soldiers. Her fingers were cut off. One of her fingers was put in her mouth. Her eyes were gouged out. She was assaulted, and the word Yashma, which is the name of the battalion, was carved on her body. And for some reason, they don't mind recording all this and putting it up on the internet. I it's almost like, it's a way to taunt further. Her sister Lala entrusted her story to us. We actually flew from Los Angeles and we took down her story um, ourselves. And Lala was emboldened by this. She took one of the worst days of her life, of her sister being this severely mutilated and killed, and it emboldened her to go to law school. We were actually able to fly her in to Washington, D.C., where she told her sister's story to members of Congress. She showed pictures, and as we know, a picture speaks more than 1,000 words. Uh, and we flew her to The Hague when we filed our first ICC communication. And I think that is one of the most beautiful stories that has come out of this atrocious time period where we were able to provide strength for this woman who, first of all, had to adopt the minor children of her sister, but who also decided that there's something she can do about it. She's not helpless. And she took the worst day of her life, and she is now a huge advocate for her sister and many Armenians across the world. And that is one of the most poignant and most important parts, I think, of CFTJ. We have given hope to a nation who didn't know that there are tools on the international forums in the international judicial system for them to find some sort of respite and justice.
That's strength that I can't even comprehend. Thank you for sharing that story with us. So, if you guys don't mind, I would like to get into the specifics of how you actually do what you do when it comes to documenting war crimes. And on your website, you talk about specific guidelines that you have when it comes to this documentation work. Can you walk us through what those guidelines are and maybe tell us a little bit about how you work with other international organizations and local humanitarian groups?
Um, so evidence gathering basically starts with interviews. We identify the victims, make sure that we receive their consent to give statements and whether they will agree to have that evidence used in various legal or other relevant uh, stages, right, or areas, and then we go to work. All it takes is a microphone and a camera, and we typically start with their roots because you want to establish where they're coming from, right? So who's their family? How are they associated with this region? And basically dive into the facts, what they've witnessed, what they've lost, what they've experienced. All of that is videotaped and audio taped, and then it's transcribed and archived, and it's used whenever appropriate or whoever needs it, again, with the consent and approval of the witness.
So you are both trained lawyers, as mentioned earlier. Um, is that the case with all the members of CFTJ? Is that a requirement to document the war crimes in the way that you just described? What are some of the professional and even national backgrounds of the people in your organization?
Well, so vast majority of us are trained attorneys. Everyone is Armenian, as far as I know, and I mean, everyone specializes in different areas, and I must mention we're all volunteers. So I personally can say that when I joined, I was training students to take those witness statements, and then again, based on what needs are or what needs to be done, we basically double in various things. PR people, tech individuals, fundraisers, and Maggie can speak to that.
Yeah, we're all attorneys by trade. Initially, I think we did have, I believe, a few who weren't, but who had worked in humanitarian forums. M- but we had to train these law students in Armenia. I think one of the best parts about this is that two of the law students who joined us in 2020, Lilith and Sharma, are now full-time CFTJ staff in Armenia. And whereas before, we would have to task them with something, now they come to us with new ideas, new avenues, including this podcast. They're the ones who brought it to our attention. So we're really proud of these young men and women, but now the women who have seen that there are avenues for them to pursue justice for their country. We have given them agency. The capacity building that we've done with these law students, they can take and use in other parts of their lives and their careers. And that's something to be very proud of.
And what would you say is the ideal profile of a volunteer or an advocate for your guys' team?
I think you have to have the stomach for it. You don't get to hear fun stories. There's a lot of strife, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of crying. You basically ask people to go back to one of the worst days of their lives and then reiterate it, recount it. Um, and you have to have the gumption for this type of work. You really have to have tenacity to understand that the changes we are making are not tangible changes and we don't see them because justice works at molasses speed. It's very slow, it's very nuanced, and you just kind of build building blocks. You add to one more thing until maybe in like 10, 15, 20 years, you'll see a difference, but at least we have a good foundation. And I think that's what you need to have as a member and an employee of CFTJ. I do want to add to what Gev said. Everyone who works in the United States does this pro bono. Um, but we do have staff in Armenia, and I think we have one in Europe as well. She mostly works with the ICC. But everybody else just has to have the patience and the tenacity to continue to do the work.
Yeah, so obviously your advocacy work is worldwide. It's not isolated to any one country, but you are obviously based in the States. If I'm not mistaken, the organization itself is registered in the States as well. So since the Trump administration's second term, what with cuts to USAID, which may be outside the scope of your work, but in terms of the advocacy side of things, have you noticed a change in that line of work since then, since the past year and a half?
Well, CFTJ is non-governmental, apolitical, and does not take a single dollar from any other organization. We don't take grants. We are not beholden to anyone but the truth, and that belongs to the people of Artsakh and the victims. Our work, we were keeping on keeping on. We uh, we are not entangled with any sort of aid and we're not beholden to any government or any agency. So our work has not changed. Our mission in that sense has not changed. Um, I do want to say that in addition to the 600 pieces of testimonial evidence, we have also gathered 1,500 pieces over actually 1,500 pieces of open source evidence. So those X posts that you see by high-ranking members of Azerbaijan or the videos that they put up on Telegram, we have now a database of evidence, and none of that has changed or shifted. We have not silenced or muted ourselves in any way. As I said, we are beholden to the truth and to the victims, and they are for whom we will continue to advocate.
So the news cycle these days moves so relentlessly that it can be very difficult for the international community or for people who are not directly impacted personally by wars and these types of events to pay attention for very long. And there's a number of other uh, similar conflicts happening across the globe. Maggie, at the start of this conversation, you mentioned how both white phosphorus and cluster munitions were used in Artsakh, and now, of course, we're seeing that being used against civilian populations and a number of other places in the world as well. So, with all that going on, how do you work to ensure that uh, international awareness of the war and the its impact on the people of Armenia is not lost in that relentless news cycle?
Um, because we don't have a very big PR budget, uh, what we do is we do international conferences. Every year we fly in um, former ICC prosecutors, academicians, scholars, reporters, journalists, and anyone involved in international law to Armenia, where we have these discussions about accountability, about the mass atrocities, about our POWs who we still have in Azerbaijan. And what that does is, first of all, we get out of this echo chamber that I discussed, where as Armenians, we just talk among ourselves. What that does is that it brings in these powers that be, these people that hold very important positions in the world. And after they're done with the conferences, they fly home and then they open up access to us. We are able to cultivate these very important relationships, whether it's with Luis Moreno Ocampo, who came to our very first conference via Zoom because it was in the middle of COVID, or whether it's Steve Swerdlow. I mean, I could just go on and on with all of these very important, high ranking, high level academicians and reporters who either write articles about Armenia or, pose questions to their college students or find other avenues for us to pursue justice that wouldn't really be open to us had we not met them and had they not come to Armenia. And so I think that's kind of what we do. It's very word of mouth. It's very organic and very grassroots. And for that, we're very proud, because even when they go back home and they are filled with disinformation from the opposite side, they know the truth. And because they flew to Armenia, they got to meet the victims, and I think that's very important for us in this age of a barrage of constant disinformation and misinformation. We are able to be rooted in truth.
I wanted to ask you both a question, sort of related to that, and you mentioned the disinformation aspect, and you know, there's a pattern that emerges not just with this conflict, but with other ones, in which, for a country like Armenia, if the news talks about it, it is because it's related to this conflict. And as a result, some people who may not know much about Armenia only know it through the lens of the conflict. Stepping outside of that for a second and zooming out, is there something that you wish people understood about Armenia that is not conveyed through these traditional media cycles, these traditional media channels? And is there something that you would like to share about the country that isn't currently done?
I could go on, but I'm going to let Gev take that one.
Please
Yeah.
do.
He's in
Well,
Armenia after all, so
sorry for the bias, but we are resilient people and we've survived a lot, and yet we're standing. I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that we've lost statehood and regained it multiple times over the last 25 centuries or so. And yet we're still here. It talks about that strive to live and create. We're builders, we're creators, scientists, musicians, artists, engineers, and uh, it's a warm place on the earth. Everyone is welcome, and thankfully, finally, it's being found out in the last few years. And I see I've been coming, thankfully, every year the past 3 4 years now, and I see the change, the amount of international tourists coming, and it's it. It's a very unique place. When I was growing up here, we in history class we were taught that it's a museum under open sky aside from the people, so there's a lot to see. It deserves a visit. Come and visit, come and see it, and you know for yourself what I'm talking about.
our hospitality, our warmth. You will never enter an Armenian's home without a whole spread being put on the table. All the mothers want to feed you. we are we're a very kind group of people, and hospitality is very important to us. So, Milosh and Andrew, if you ever have the pleasure of visiting, please do. If you have ever have the opportunity, because you will be mesmerized by not only the open museum but by the people.
Well, you've convinced me to book my flight, so
I think
I will take you up on it.
And it's a stone's throw
was it
for
number
you.
1 in Europe's, did I read that right? It was number 1 in Europe's top places to travel in 2026, something like that?
Yeah, something like that. I came across a few
Yeah.
articles beginning of the year.
Yeah, and I think we hit record tourism for the first half of 2026, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow. Okay, well, that's a statistic I'd like to contribute to.
Yes.
Well, I should have asked you this before, because now I'm going to bring the mood slightly down. But in terms of bringing it back to the conflict for just a second, but again, you mentioned the disinformation, the misinformation aspects of it all. So is there any recommended sources that you would say people who are interested in learning more about the conflict should go and follow and should go and check out?
Um, so as far as good journalism goes, uh, CivilNet I think is a pretty good resource. Uh,
Our website.
our website, ours is very specific, obviously. Sorry, I should have started with our website. But as far as news is concerned, yes,
CFTjustice.org.
right. And in terms of learning about recent Armenian history from purely factual point, there is a journalist, independent journalist, who has a website, I think, called ANI Research Center. He does great work, basically uh, spreading light on the archives about Armenia and Armenians in the last 125 years. So those are the ones I would recommend.
Awesome. Now, Maggie, a few minutes ago, you mentioned that justice moves at molasses speed. So, a question for both of you based off that fact: what gives you both the strength to keep going and to do this kind of difficult work and persevere over all of the challenges that come with the slow speed of justice?
I would revert back to my great grandma for as long as I can remember, even as a kid. She would sit me down and she would talk about the genocide to me, even when I was like 2, 3, 4, 7 years old. And I would hear all these stories, and I think it's ingrained in me that my people have had injustice happen to them. But what I didn't see was her ever, before she passed, her ever seeing the perpetrators come to justice or be recognized as that, as being perpetrators. As a matter of fact, the United States didn't even accept the Armenian genocide when she died in 2003. So she died knowing that her strife didn't matter and it was not important for the world to recognize. So that keeps me going. The fact that my maternal homeland is lost forever. I actually remember going to Artsakh as a little kid. As I said, I came here in the early 90s when I was 6, but I have pictures of Artsakh. My husband has visited many, many times. He's not even from Artsakh, and it's one of the most beautiful, magical places that you'll ever be, and the people are so kind and so generous and so welcoming, and I have uncles now and aunts who have basically lost their homes. As I said, we've lost grave sites, so that keeps me going, and, um, coupled with that is the fact that I owe it to my children to show them that when an injustice is done to you and you have the means, you have to fight. You have to fight for the disenfranchised. Um, and finally, we have the truth. We have the truth on our side. We're a very neutral organization when we take down the information. We don't lead. We don't ask leading questions. We ask them to give us their story, and story upon story upon story upon story, it's the same. It's the same for the repatriated POWs, it's the same for the people who's had their rights violated, it's the same for those who were ethnically cleansed, and so we have the truth on our side, and because we have the tools, we have a mandate to do something about it.
We're sort of approaching the end here, and I already wanted to thank you both for your time, for your work as well, and for sharing all of what we've been talking about with us. We like to end these episodes by providing our listeners with actionable steps on what to do next if they want to help out. And you've already mentioned, following CFTJ, reading up on the work that you provide, the documentation that you've been after. Is there any other organization they should follow? Any other steps they should take? Is there any recommendation that you would have for them at this point?
Community support is very important to CFTG. As I said, we don't take a dollar from governments, from grants, and if you're able to donate, that would be fantastic. As I said, our work is pro bono, but we do have a staff. We have yearly conferences that we put together.
I'll just add that yes, we are uh, focused heavily on Artsakh and Armenian issues of the past 5 or so years, but we've also been receptive and helped other individuals. I believe they were individuals who needed some guidance in terms of evidence gathering in another region of the world engulfed in conflict. And we're basically a source that, if need be, are available to provide the training and support to gather evidence in other conflicts to represent the victims' rights.
Awesome stuff. Well, hopefully we can do our part in spreading the word about the work that you guys do. And with that, wanted to thank you both for coming on, and hopefully we keep the conversation going, and hopefully we meet again, preferably in Armenia.
Yeah, it's
Thank
truly
you
been
both.
Hopefully so.
Yeah.
Thank you both for doing this. What you guys asked the question, how do we keep the momentum and how do we keep the conversation alive? It's because of gentlemen like you and podcasts like yours.
Thank you for the opportunity, truly.
Thank you for saying that. We appreciate it. Thank you.
This has been an episode of the St. Martin's Cloak podcast. Today is June 8th, 2026. Thank you all for listening. And until next time, stay strong and stay safe.